Last week, we looked at John's gospel and the story of Jesus being recognized by Andrew as the Lamb of God. We focused on your Moravian logo, which you can see here in front of the pulpit, and the motto, "Our Lamb has conquered, let us follow him." Today, we'll continue to follow Jesus, this time into the tiny village of Capernaum on the Sea of Galilee. And as we do that, pay special attention to the social and religious geography at the time of Jesus. So today will be a little bit of a geography lesson for all of you. But what I invite you to do as we look at the geography is to also explore the divine geography, that God is working within space and place and people. At the end, I'll invite you to consider what you found interesting about this walk through Israel and this exploration of social geography. And I'll invite you to think about what's going on that our God, the God of the universe, calls Jesus to these places. What's significant about Jesus being sent to these places? Okay, we're going to go through the gospel again with a fine-tooth comb, and I'll use some images, of course, to help. So our first slide has the scripture, the opening of the gospel for today. Now, when Jesus heard that John had been arrested, he withdrew to Galilee. So it makes sense. You don't want to be arrested next. People are following you. You want to go away and be safe. And so Jesus goes to the Galilee. Before we get to Galilee, a little review. We all know where Jesus was born, and that is Bethlehem. Okay, very good. And we all remember where Jesus was raised, Nazareth. Very good. And of course, we remember where Jesus died and rose, Jerusalem. Very good. Excellent. You've all passed. So we'll look at our first slide. So here we have Jerusalem. And what we have at this top is the church. It's the garden where it's believed that Jesus was crucified, so Golgotha. And a 2-hour walk south is Bethlehem. So that is, what is that, 10 kilometers thereabouts? So it's not too far where Jesus was born and then where Jesus died and rose. The temple, as you know, is situated in Jerusalem, and the temple is the center point of Jewish worship. It is there that Jews connect most deeply with God. So Jesus fulfills the system in which we have this distance with God, and that distance is bridged by Jesus' death. Okay, let's zoom out now and look to see where Bethlehem and Jerusalem are in relation to Nazareth, where Jesus was raised, and the Galilee further north. So here we have Jerusalem in the south, and about 150 kilometers north, we have Nazareth, 29-hour walk. And the thing is, we have in the Gospels, Jesus going from Jerusalem to the Galilee pretty regularly. It's like he had, a fast car service or a speed train to go up and down constantly. But, if you think about it, 150 kilometers is roughly from here to Lacombe. So it's not entirely, not doable to walk bits and pieces of it and stopping along the way. But it is not a large area we're talking about. What I want to highlight here, and this is a very important point to mention, is that in the time of Jesus, there was a religious divide in Israel. It's a complex history, too much to get into a Sunday sermon. But essentially, Israel, all of this area, was divided into two. And the northern half and the southern half, Judah. Each of them, of course, were populated by Israelites, but in time, Jerusalem became the capital of the southern kingdom and the center point of religion for the folks in the south. And Samaria, roughly in the middle here, became the religious capital of the Israelites in the north. Now, they were, by the southerners, the northerners were considered to be half-bloods because many of them started to marry people who were not Jewish and take on some and adapted their religion to Judaism. And so this is, we read in the Gospel of the Samaritans. These are some of the folks that live in the middle that were looked down upon by the southerners. So we have to remember that in the time of Jesus, it was divided religiously. So that is operating in the background. But we remember that Jesus overturned this division. Remember the story of the Good Samaritan was a story where Jesus said, it doesn't matter where you worship, but doing the will of God is what is most important. We'll look at the next slide now, the route between Nazareth to Capernaum. It's interesting to note that Nazareth was a little tiny hamlet. Roughly about 500 people lived there. And not too far, a 4-mile walk from Nazareth is a Roman city called Sepphoris. And Sepphoris, because it's Roman, had plumbing, it had tiles, it had a theater, it had centers of learning. Roughly 2,000 people lived in Sepphoris. And it's believed that Jesus, the carpenter, would have, as a tradesperson, perhaps with his father Joseph, would have worked in Sepphoris, building homes for Roman citizens who lived there. And then 42 kilometers away, or an 8-hour and 30-minute walk, is Capernaum, right here on the edge of the Sea of Galilee. So that's where Jesus flees to. What I'd like to note here is not the religious divide, but in this case, the rural-urban divide. So Jesus lives in a very small town, not far from a bigger city. And the disparity is huge. So he's putting tiles into homes, but his own house has nothing but packed earth. They have running water in Sepphoris, and Jesus would have had to go to the well to get water. And not too far from Sepphoris would have been a larger city, another Roman city. So roughly around here would have been the administrative capital of this region called Caesarea. Population 5,000. So again, Nazareth 500, Sepphoris 2,000, and then Caesarea 5,000. Again, Roman city, tiles, theaters, social spaces, plumbing, all of that. And Jesus would have been aware of these big cities. So we have some disparity between rich and not rich and poor, educated, not educated, the administration of the space, and the common folk. Okay, we'll continue on to the next slide. Jesus left Nazareth and made his home in Capernaum by the sea, and in the territory of Zebulun and Naphtali. You might recall that all of Israel was taken over and divided to the 12 sons of Israel. And 2 of those sons, Zebulun and Naphtali, received these parcels of land. And important to remember here is that Zebulun and Naphtali turned to the pagans. So a lot of non-Jewish folk, Gentiles, would have lived in this area. And the Israelites of the time adapted and even became pagan. And so it was a concern by the rest of the Israelites that these siblings of theirs had turned away from God. And so, not surprisingly, the prophet Isaiah prophesies that a light shall come to save these people, to bring them back to God. In this point, we want to remember that God enters into this space. Jesus makes a home in this place. We'll look at the next slide here of modern day Capernaum. So Jesus goes from Nazareth to Capernaum by the sea. And you'll notice here just the geography of it. We have some farmland, fields of perhaps wheat and barley. Capernaum would have been built about 100 years before Jesus. It was a very small town, not as small as Nazareth. So Nazareth, again, 500 people. Capernaum, I believe, had about 1,500 people lived in Capernaum. And then, of course, the Sea of Galilee, which in my research, there were 18 indigenous species of fish, including a type of tilapia. And actually, Doug, if you scroll down here, this is a common dish that you would have in the area. Not sure if Jesus would have had the French fries, though. And funnily enough, this tilapia fish is called the Peter fish. And they have also a type of carp, a type of sardine. So you can imagine a fisherman could make a decent living, providing an important protein to many of these farmers and the families in the region. When Jesus says to his apostles, "Follow me and I will make you fish for people," leaving your livelihood, your way of making a living, would be difficult. Okay, lots of geography there. We've traveled throughout Israel. We've touched on some of the divides, the social complications of the time, a bit of the history. I invite you to sit in this place and imagine yourself in Israel in the time of Jesus. This is the place where God chooses to reach out to God's people, where Jesus, through his teaching, his life, his ministry, his healing, his forgiveness, brings about God's kingdom in the world. What strikes you about this place? What strikes you about God's wisdom in choosing this space? Would anyone like to share? Maybe our friends who have visited the Holy Land. What struck you about visiting? What did you notice? What did you see? Right, and Caesarea, being on the coast, would have brought in ships and goods from all over the Roman Empire. So that would have been a very cosmopolitan city. And that being spread throughout Israel. So the trade routes bringing in new things. Anything else? What strikes you? Sparsely populated. Do we know of any villages in Alberta that are 500 and below? Imagine, Jesus, Prince of Peace, King of the universe, starts there to bring about God's will for the world. What else strikes you of this place? There's certainly, some big differences between Edmonton and this space, but there's also some commonalities. What do you discern as being similar? What do we have that's very similar to this area? Yeah. So it's believed that when Jesus was coming of age and walking to Sepphoris, 4 miles away for work, also a traditional place where Mary was born. So maybe Mary had family in Sepphoris. That, every day walking home, going from a wealthy Roman city to a dusty little village, hamlet, 4 miles away, taught Jesus something. It enabled him to see this disparity, to hear the cries of the poor, and to respond. Any other points about this geography, this space? The climate difference, yeah. Between here and there, of course. Right. Hot. And so certainly if you were a farmer concerned for enough precipitation for your crops. So you're always precarious in terms of if we can make it this year. So relying on God is important to provide. We don't usually think about that because we can get avocados all throughout the year. We can get fruits and vegetables all throughout the year. But imagine if we get a little bit of this through inflation, the cost of salad being more expensive. But imagine if we go to the grocery store and there's nothing there because of lack of precipitation. And so these folks had a deep connection with God, who provided for the rain and for their daily bread. Any other points? For me, this shows that Jesus does not make a home in a big, sophisticated city or town around the educated people, the administration, or the rich. Jesus doesn't even come to the capital of the empire, or the capital of the region, or even the capital of the religion. Jesus doesn't even do ministry in the right half of the kingdom, or among those who already have faith. Jesus comes to the rural areas and among hardworking laborers and builds a home there. He heals, forgives, teaches, and loves them all. This same Jesus is with us today in the ruralness of our hearts. He heals, forgives, and teaches us right here in our daily lives, in our congregation, and in our city. Imagine that for a moment. Jesus making a home right here with us in Edmonton, in this faith community. Just as Jesus taught in the synagogue in Capernaum, the Jewish meeting place, and Jesus speaks to us today in the Word.